Even amongst the many taverns, festivals, and celebrations of Aria, nothing could possibly compare to the excitement of the Everfest Carnival. A massive, moving circus, the Everfest travels through Aria, a sea of brightly colored big tops, boasting the biggest collection of performances in all of Rathe. Yet, of all its acts, none were so famous or beloved as Bravo's Legendarium. Bravo was raised among the strongest strongmen and fiercest animal acts of the Valder, growing up alongside great, majestic Cesari and tiny meeps that darted from stall to stall. Many of his closest friends were members of the Mela, oracles, bards, skalds, enchanters, and fortune tellers, all breezing about the Everfest in loose silks and layers of golden jewelry. One of the Mela elders, a woman with fine white hair and a single eye, always made time for the young boy. She often spent time sharing the tales of Aria with him, spinning both fantastical tales and old legends. Bravo listened to the tales of powerful enchanters and mysterious shamans, of magical artifacts and hidden wonders. It sparked a hunger for stories untold, and even as an adult, Bravo continued to seek out more. One day, after his 18th birthday, Bravo decided to perform one of the old legends within the carnival, bring it to life upon the stage. He recreated one of Aria's most beloved tales, the legend of Magnus the Vigilant. With such bravado and talent that Bravo had, the performances quickly became a staple of the Everfest, transforming into the Legendarium. As the act's popularity continued to grow, so did the size of Bravo's troupe. By the age of 26, Bravo had amassed a troupe of over 30 performers and stagehands, with an act that was beloved by audiences across Aria. While the troupe had their fair share of followers, it was Bravo who often found himself at the center of attention. He quickly found himself overrun by avid fans, his charisma and confidence earning him admirers everywhere he went. Yet even as he enjoyed performing, there was a part of him that still lingered for more. During a life traveling with the Everfest Carnival, Bravo had visited every village in Aria. Yet, no matter how many he traveled to, Aldavir remained one of his favorites. A sprawling village, its buildings were scattered across the plains, flowers and herbs growing in rolling meadows. In the midst of summer, the Everfest made its way to Aldavir once more, greeted with the sight of lush, dense meadows overrun with flowers. While the Legendarium was on hiatus, many of the troupe members had scattered across Aria, taking their time to visit other villages and explore the land. After spending the previous day helping to set up the many tents and stalls of the Everfest, Bravo was looking forward to spending his morning in the camp of a nice, tall glass of alder cider inside the local tavern. However, just as he was fastening the buttons on his favorite crimson coat, he heard someone clear their throat in the open doorway of his tent. Gawain and Morgan stood imposing even in the light of the morning sun, quickly and excitedly inviting them to join him for a drink. Bravo had met the duo many moons ago when they first arrived within the Everfest. Seeing their broad shoulders and muscles, their old world appearance, and their stalwart natures, Bravo had approached and asked the pair to join his troupe immediately. Reserved and taciturn, they were excellent at supportive roles and quickly became staple members of the Legendarium. With the act currently on break, it was hardly surprising to see the pair with packs and traveling gear. However, when Bravo asked about their plans, they stared at him blankly. "The Wayfinders have summoned us." Morgan was the slightly more talkative of the pair, his deep timbre echoing in the small space. "We leave for the Fractal Scar." Bravo looked from their grim expressions to the packs upon their soldiers, then to the weapons clasped at their sides. While Gawain and Morgan originally arrived at the Everfest with the pair finely crafted great axes, Bravo rarely saw the weapons. To see the great axes once more, it reminded Bravo of the tales that they performed, of noble defenders leaving on a quest, an adventure that would take them across Aria in the pursuit of protecting the innocent. Gawain and Morgan leaving on some grand journey, clad in armor and furs, wielding their great axes with pride, traveling for months, perhaps years. A journey taking them from village to village in search of their targets, helping townsfolk and rescuing fair maidens from harm. At last, when they arrived at their destination, a great evil would appear before them, one they are destined to defeat. We stood toe to toe with an ancient creature, something long forgotten by the people of Arya. Covered in scales, it raised its head with a bellowing roar and launched itself towards us. We fought valiantly, taking blow after blow as we worked together to defeat the beast. At last, I got close enough to the creature to find an opening in its defenses. With a single swing of my great axe, I beheaded the great beast, silencing once more. We returned to the townsfolk with the creature's head, arriving to the sound of cheering. The townsfolk held a festival in our honor, a token of thanks for their valiant heroes. Bravo clapped once, decisively, nodding his head. I'm coming with you! Gawain and Morgan looked to one another, the taller of the pair silently raising an eyebrow. After a long moment, they turned back to him. To anyone else, Gawain's expression would have looked exactly the same, but Bravo had known him long enough to glimpse an air of resignation in his fixed stare. Morgan shrugged. We leave at noon. It didn't take long for Bravo to gather his things. His packs, still mostly untouched from arriving in Aldvir the previous day. The last thing he gathered was his beloved mallet, an Othos, forged from polished wood and finely hammered silver steel. He stopped to visit his companions amongst the Mela, and those of his troops who had stayed within Aldvir. Once he had said his goodbyes, he had left to meet Gawain and Morgan just beyond the outermost circles of the tents. The trio began their journey across Arya, making their way towards the massive crystalline cliffs of the Fractal Scar. The long days and balmy evenings of midsummer allowed them to spend more hours traveling during the day, spending their nights sleeping beneath the gentle lights of the stars. The towns they passed through were more than happy to give them a place to rest, giving them fruit, loaves of fresh bread, and most importantly bottles of ale, for them to take on their journey. While travelers were common across Arya, the trio encountered more than usual heading in the same direction, and all of them traveling toward the Fractal Scar. However, as they grew closer to their destination, the atmosphere began to change. The towns and villages they visited seemed a little quieter. Despite the bright sunshine and balmy warmth of midsummer, there were no bird songs, no coyote darting across the fields, no Fianna roaming the landscape. It seemed as if there was no animals to be found at all. Each person they spoke to only described the feeling of waking up one morning to an unusual, eerie silence and venturing outside to find the native plains empty. The three men began to feel an increasing sense of urgency. Every wayfarer they passed on their journey seemed to fly across the earth, racing past with their dowsing discs aglow, traveling on foot, traversing the rolling fields with surprising speed, their long braids streaming behind them as they sped past in the opposite direction of the Fractal Scar. One night, they stopped in a village close to their destination, arriving to find the buildings dark and quiet. The townsfolk were nowhere to be found, their belongings left behind, plates still set on the table, mugs of cider and mulled wine still sitting out, half empty. While Gawain and Morgan scouted out the rest of the village, Bravo searched the local tavern, searching for some sign of the people that had abandoned their homes. All of the casks were intact, chairs left sitting at their tables, the beds upstairs half made. Some of the rooms still had packs in them, though none revealed any clues about their missing owners. As Bravo began to make his way downstairs, he heard a quiet chitter. Anyone who visited the Everfest Carnival knew to keep an eye out for the mischievous meeps. Growing up within the Everfest, Bravo had developed a keen awareness of the sound of a meep making its move, the only warning one might get before the creature ran off with one's purse. Sure enough, Bravo turned to find a meep sitting on the balustrade, its beady little gaze fixed pointedly at one of Bravo's golden earrings. It was incredibly rare to find a meep outside of its natural environment, the Everfest Carnival. The perfect environment for the tiny little thieves. Yet here one was, and in a deserted village no less. Several minutes later, Bravo descended to find Gawain and Morgan waiting for him, leaning against the tavern's counter. As they turned towards him, he watched their gazes flick to his ear, and then to the meep sitting happily on his shoulder, a single gold ring strung onto its tail. In response to their confused looks, the meep chittered, happily, waving its prize up in the air. According to Morgan, the wayfarers had set up a camp near the fractal scar, rallying those who came to offer their aid. Marbles, the meep that Bravo had befriended, drawn to the flash of the sunlight reflected by the dowsing discs, led them from wayfarer to wayfarer, all making their way to the fractal scar. They were soon pointed in the right direction, and without Marbles' help, it may have taken them weeks to find their way through the icy plains. When they finally arrived at the fractal scar, the scene before them sent a chill down their spines. Unlike the gentle, rolling meadows of Aldvir, the village that lay before them was an ashen husk of its former self. Houses lay abandoned, open doors swinging in the wind, blood smeared against the charred wood. The wayfarers had claimed a small section of the land at the edge of the village, making use of the blacksmith's forge as a meeting place. Bravo approached one of them, a slender young man in the process of restringing his bow. Like many of the other wayfarers, he sat with his shoulders slumped, dark circles hanging beneath his eyes, skin sallow, eyes drooping closed with every other breath. Clearing his throat, Bravo politely greeted the young man, receiving a small, tired smile in response. Both stared silently at a moment, speech faltering, before Bravo finally gestured to the village around them. "What happened?" Bravo asked. With a sigh, the young man began to share a report from one of the older wayfarers. Many years ago, a group of wayfarers had come across a massive sinkhole to the south of Arya, where the earth had suddenly caved in. Assuming that it was the work of the flow, they filled it in and thought nothing more of it. Then, several months ago, in the early hours before dawn, a deep, rolling rumble woke several villagers from their slumber. The ground quaked as people emerged from their homes, searching for the source of the sound, but found nothing. No changes had affected the land around them, no shimmer in the air to show the influence of the flow. It seemed as if the earth itself had mysteriously risen from a deep, dark slumber. Some of the townsfolk set out to check the surrounding area, only to stumble across the cause by accident. They witnessed the surface of the earth begin to crack apart, and before anyone could think to get to safety, a swarm of creatures burst out of the sinkhole, clawing their way through the pile of loose dirt. The creatures descended upon the town and any villages near the fractal scar, in a mindless rampage, slaughtering anything that crossed their path. The wayfarer called them dregs, humanoid figures with bloated, rotting bodies. Their faces were a mass of melted, discolored skin, dripping the length of their bony, twisted limbs. When they attacked, the air was heavy with the smell of burning flesh, bile and decay, steam rising from their open, gaping wounds. After giving Bravo, Gawain, and Morgan some advice on how best to handle the creatures, the archer told them where to go next, a village heavily hit by the attacks, where their help was desperately needed, if they were able. For months, they traveled along the edges of what once was the fractal scar, hunting down dregs and helping others who had stepped up to the task. Some of the villages they came across were still occupied, their townsfolk carefully guarded by defenders in makeshift armor. Other villages lay abandoned, left vacant by fleeing townspeople, destroyed by the swarm of dregs following in their wake. Marbles helped in his own way, of course, darting onto Bravo's shoulders to chitter at drained defenders and anxious townfolk. His tiny, expressive face often brought a smile to the people's faces, bringing some amount of levity to the tension hanging in the air. Even with a heavy heart, Bravo began to grow accustomed to his new way of life, learning to use Anothos for true battle. Hunting dregs alongside Gawain and Morgan, Bravo developed skills necessary to keep himself alive and eliminate the creatures that threatened his home, as well as protect the people there. The trio were making their way back to the Wayfarer's base, seeking another quest, when they received word of a large swarm of dregs traveling further into Aria. A call went out to anyone within range, asking them to gather at a nearby village. The trio immediately changed course and made their way to the meeting point, arriving to find a small crowd of people preparing themselves for battle. Even to one who had grown up in the Everfest Carnival, the collection of people gathered in the valley were mysterious and unfamiliar. Makeshift armor, worn leathers, faded silks, and mended linens were worn alongside ancient helmets and layers of golden jewelry. Some looked as if they had stepped straight out of an act in the Everfest. Others as if they just emerged from the tavern for the first time in months. Yet all of them were prepared to fight. Weapons at the ready. The defender at the head of the valley, a towering man dressed in a patchwork collection of armor, called everyone to arms. Those gathered leapt into action, following him over the hill and toward the village to face the swarm. A massive group of dregs milled about the buildings, eerily silent as they moved. Some of them dragged chains behind them, still attached to manacles around their necks. Others had scraps of torn fabric hanging from their skin, or clutched at pieces of armor and leather. One had a humanoid hand clasped in its claw, still wearing a strange metallic gauntlet on what remained of its forearm. As a battle cry rang in the air, the swarm turned towards the commotion. The dregs were much faster in a group than Bravo had expected, moving quickly despite their bent and twisted limbs. The pungent smell of decay filled the air, thick and clogging, building at the back of his throat until it burned. Swinging an Onothos overhead, he slammed the hammer into a dreg's skull, sending it colliding to the earth. Turning on his heel, he caught another in the temple before it could sink its claws into him. One of the larger dregs towered over him, a snarl escaping from somewhere behind the mass of melted skin covering its face. As it lunged toward him, he stumbled and couldn't raise an Althos in time to stop it from tearing into his arm. Out of the corner of his eye, he caught a glimpse of another dreg advancing, its mouth hanging partially open as it threw itself forward. In that instant, Bravo suddenly felt the world tilt sideways, and a number of things happened in quick succession. A sharp pain burst to life behind his eyes, almost blinding him. The world took on a bright, hazy glare, an unnatural heat coursing through his veins. For just a moment, he could have sworn that he saw a spectral shape in the air before him, curling through the light in the same way that the Cicerai moves through the air. That same iridescent light coiled up his arm. Charging through the polished wood of Onothos, the hammer shimmered, and a rainbow of colors burst forth, radiant and shining. Instinctually, he swung Onothos in a wide arc, and the mallet collided with the bottom of the dreg's jaw. Its skull immediately exploded in fragments of bone and light dropping to the grass at its feet. Bravo charged at the other dreg on his left, taking his head off its shoulders with a single swing in a sickening liquid crunch. Gawain and Morgan appeared in the midst of the fray, joining him on either side, their great axes a flash of silver in his peripheral view. Dreg after dreg collapsing to the ground, bodies dropping to encircle Bravo and his friends as they made short work of the creatures around them. Every swing set another dreg slamming into the earth, bones cracking beneath the force of every hammer strike. Before long, the last dreg fell, leaving the village silent, as every person present slowly turned to look at their surroundings. A cheer sounded through the valley, ringing in between the buildings as everyone gathered themselves, pleased to see their companions were still standing. Gawain and Morgan turned towards Bravo, mostly unharmed, relief and pride beaming from their faces instead of their usual deadpan expressions. In the coming days, they helped to search the hills for any remaining dregs, but with the majority of the force dealt with, it seemed as if peace would reign once more in the Fractal Scar. Some of the townsfolk even began to return to their original homes, as defenders helped to set up protective measures and began the many needed repairs. Bravo spent most of his time with the villagers, talking with the townsfolk and putting on short performances alongside Gawain and Morgan. Many of those present recognized them from the Everfest Carnival, and he soon found himself the star of the show once again. While the villagers had only just begun the long journey to recovery, they put on a festival to celebrate their victory. making Bravo one of their honored guests. He stopped to talk to each person that wanted to offer their gratitude, accepting their kind words with a smile and wink, but never accepting anything else. After many months away, Bravo and his companions finally decided to return to the Everfest Carnival. Saying their goodbyes and taking nothing but the gratitude of the people, they began to make their way home north, Marbles following not far behind. After getting word of their return, the entire troupe was waiting for them when they arrived, welcoming them home with wide smiles and no small amount of celebration. The Legendarium's bard, Mikal, was bursting with new ideas, launching into a rapport of all the new stories that he'd learned while in the Milesian ranges. Meanwhile, Marbles emerged from Bravo's back, greeting the troupe with an excited chitter. While he was happy to see his friends and family once more, it felt strange to return to the Everfest. After spending so many months away, even as he greeted his troupe, his mind drifted back to the battles and the creatures they had faced. The happiness expressed by each villager as they finally got to return home after the long battle. He had heard wayfarers speak of unusual changes in the flow, and one had hinted that the dregs were not the only threat to Aria. Change was coming, rapidly, and the events of the Fractal Scar were only the beginning. Bravo would not lose the Everfest to creatures like the dregs, and he would not let it be destroyed like the barren villages that they had come across in their travels. He vowed to find a way to protect the Everfest Carnival and all of the other villages and towns that they visited across Aria. As Bravo greeted his companions, following them into the sea of tents with a broad grin, a single figure remained near the edge of the tents. An old woman dressed in the loose silks and woven fabrics of the oracles, her golden jewelry marking her as one of the Mela. Her single eye gleamed as she watched Bravo leave. A small smile tugged at the corner of her lips as she remembered a true tale that was once told. The Guardians shall return once more.